What are some really dangerous things most people don't realize are dangerous? A few inches of moving water over a roadway. And while a few inches is usually fine, you can't be sure it's actually a few inches. A road can be completely washed out and look like a relatively minor flood. Fun story. When my dad was younger, one of his uncles told him never to drive into water a mule wouldn't cross. A few years later, he was trying to decide whether to cross a flooded road and remembered that conversation. He saw the next day that the road had completely washed out. He told his uncle about it, and apparently his uncle was drunk and didn't even remember saying it. Lol. Oh hell, Ricky, I was high when I said that. I based my whole life off of that. Driving while tired. It can be just as dangerous as driving while drunk, but many people do it without thinking twice. For context, 20 hours awake impairs you as much as 0.08% BAC, which counts as DUI in many states. I'm a firefighter and it's insane sometimes driving to a house fire or cardiac arrest when we haven't slept all night. Like, I can literally feel everything moving slower and it's sketchy. 48-hour shifts are wild. Edit. Y'all can just DM me if you have questions you really want answered. Lol. I have done similar things driving in the military. Sometimes I didn't trust my own eyes and driving almost on autopilot is scary. Having to blink extra hard every few seconds. Crazy. Yeah, we have ammonia amps to wake patients up and I've literally been smelling those prior to driving code to a fire to wake up. What also works is what we call a Frischluftwaschen, fresh air slap, in Bavaria, where you open the windows on both sides while driving 100 kilometers per hour, therefore getting slapped awake by the air. At a certain point of tired, this stops working for me. A lot of people end up with liver failure from overusing Tylenol. It's not harmless, don't treat it like Skittles. Acetaminophen poisoning is so bad that our school gave us a PSA on OTC medications that contain it, and to always check the drug ingredients to make sure you don't consume too much. I took too much Percocet once when I had a very painful pinched nerve. I began to feel weirder than weird, in a bad way, and went to the where I was told I could have died if I'd continued to take the painkiller as I'd been doing. I did not know until then that Percocet is mostly Tylenol, with just a little bit of narcotic, and it's not the narcotic that could have killed me. Reminds me of that kid that killed himself because he saw a meme about cough medicine chicken. He bought 2 bottles, cooked the chicken in it, and drank all the sauce. He had no idea what he was doing, and by the time he went to the hospital it was too late. AB is a 15-year-old boy, presenting index pointing up to the emergency room unconscious. Edit. Got to have the finger. Not having enough sodium. There's always warnings about too much salt, but apparently if you don't have enough it can throw your body totally out of whack. Learned this after passing out and ending up in the Yep. One of its most important functions, along with potassium, is maintaining electrical potential across nerve cell membranes. Without that your nerves won't work. I ended up in hospital because of what they deemed fatally low potassium levels. That sucked. My husband was born with a genetic disorder called Gittleman syndrome that causes his kidneys to waste potassium, magnesium, and sodium. Before we had him diagnosed, he was in and out of ICU with critically low levels of all 3, even going into cardiac arrest in the living room once. Since then, he has to take huge doses of these gigantic horse pills multiple times a day to maintain his levels, and his doctor has him a high sodium diet. My mom has Gittleman syndrome. I was reading this thread wondering if someone would mention it given its rarity. She has to visit an infusion center twice a week for potassium and magnesium, along with taking 40 potassium pills a day. It was crazy to hear that her doctor basically told her, you need to eat fast food, or basically anything high in sodium. Even with all of this, she's a very weak woman. Strong-willed though. I hope the best for your husband and an eventual cure for this awful disease. Tailgating at 70 miles per hour. Edit. Thank you Redditors for the overwhelming response and for the anonymous gold. To be honest, This thread moved to the left lane for passing. Discussion. It wasn't the goal of my response. My response is more about how a tailgater will dramatically increase the risk of an accident versus being patient and sharing the road with others. 100% of accidents are when two objects want to occupy the same space. And the logic of getting closer to the object in front of you at relatively high speed seems illogical to me. The way some people drive makes me really hate driving. I always point out bad drivers to my kids and why it's bad driving, so hopefully they're not one of them when they're older. I don't know what has happened within the last 5 to 10 years, but it definitely seems like more people are driving like assholes now. It's rare for me to see someone actually stop at a stop sign. I'd even settle for a rolling stop where the person slows down a lot, but even that is asking too much. Apparently. Like just straight up slightly slow to sling around a turn. And GT, it's rare for me to see someone actually stop at a stop sign. I see people literally blast through them. I mean tap the brakes just slightly and then speed up. When little Timmy rode the road, he said, "I think it's fine to drive as though it's road I'm owed, as if the road is mine. And if I choose to drive behind a person going slow, then to my simple, addled mind, it's right behind I go. Perhaps I'll speed them up," he said, with open hope and pride. So Timmy chose the car ahead. And Timmy fucking died. It's terrifying as a pedestrian. People blasting through stop signs, turning right and only looking left, in a car the size of a World War II tank, and me, a lowly human, trying to cross on the crosswalk in my residential neighborhood. In Mississippi, the second person back at a four-way stop will often power through on the tailgate of the person whose turn it actually is. I guess they feel like, hey, I stopped, whether they were actually at the white line or not. Garage door springs. Ours broke one night and it sounded like a damn 12 gauge going off. Can confirm, do not go anywhere near those things. When ours broke, it sounded like a car crashing into the garage. I was in bed when mine broke, which is basically right over my garage door. Shook the bed like a small earthquake. A full force punch to the face. People have died from a single punch. Also just being pushed or falling on the ground. Human bodies can surprisingly be very weak and very strong. But not as strong as concrete. When I was a kid, the father of a kid in my neighborhood, young guy 20s probably, was tossing a football around with some neighborhood kids, fell and hit his head on the concrete, and died of internal bleeding, sad face. My stepbrother accidentally killed his best friend when they drunkenly punched on over something stupid. He fell and hit his head and died instantly. It wrecked him. He spent a couple of years in prison for manslaughter, murder too, I think you call it. The whole time his friend's family forgave and stood by him as they saw him as a son, brother. It was tragic and beautiful simultaneously. Poor guy still mentally beats himself up about it now, years later. That's horrible. A guy the first used to work with was holding the ladder for his dad who had climbed up to fix something. Dad lost his balance and fell on the concrete. Split his head open and died. My friend was a teenager. Talk about a horrific thing to watch. This happened to me right at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm an Asian guy and got sick of being called coronavirus randomly. It happened a lot. One night, I saw two guys on the street, and they yelled it at me. So I told them to fuck off and then went my own way. They came up to me and gave me a shove or a punch. Can't quite remember. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital a day later with staples in my head. Apparently I hit my head on the concrete and was unconscious. Thankfully there were other people on the street who called an ambulance. The doctors performed a craniotomy, a procedure where they took out a piece of my skull to drain the blood. I'm fine now and will forever respect the concrete. A million blows from rugby did nothing to me, but one little push could have led to a lot worse. Edit. Thanks for everyone for their support. Y'all are awesome. People often suck, but what else can we do but hope and work for a better humanity? Eating grapefruit while on medication. Grapefruit has so many bad interactions with medication, ranging from rendering the medication ineffective, to toxicity. It's so funny how grapefruit is so lethal. They were able to put a new heart inside of me with no problems, but if I ingested some grapefruit I'd be a goner. Yup. It's a brutal interaction with tacrolimus, the most ubiquitous anti-rejection medication. I've been taking it for almost 2 years BC of a bone marrow transplant. Putting your feet on the dashboard. It is extremely dangerous. My physics teacher in high school had a lengthy and graphic description of exactly what occurs when you are in an accident with your feet on the dash. Absolutely horrifying. Teaching done right. I think he wrote it after seeing students driving around the lot with their feet up. He was a dual MD, PhD and was a former doctor, and I honestly